Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley to the Mount of Olives. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into a place called Gethsemane.
Sit here while I go over there and pray.
Jesus took Peter and James and John, the two sons of Zebedee, along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. On reaching the place, Jesus said to them,
My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Pray that you will not fall into temptation.
He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down, and prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him.
Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done.
An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Going a little farther, he fell on his face to the ground and prayed,
My Father, Abba, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will.
Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping, exhausted from sorrow. He asked Peter,
Couldn't you disciples keep watch with me for 1 hour? All of you, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
They did not know what to say to him. Jesus went away a second time and prayed,
My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done.
When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them,
Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer.
Now Judas, one of the 12, and the one who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So while Jesus was still speaking, Judas arrived, leading a crowd of soldiers and some officials. The crowd was armed with swords and clubs and carrying torches and lanterns. The crowd was sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them.
The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard.
Judas approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him,
Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?
Going at once to Jesus, Judas said,
Greetings, Rabbi.
and Judas kissed Jesus.
Do what you came for, friend.
Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went to them and asked the group of soldiers and officials,
Who is it you want?
Jesus of Nazareth.
I am he.
Judas the traitor was standing there with him. When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them,
Who is it you want?
Jesus of Nazareth.
I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go.
This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken would be fulfilled.
I have not lost one of those you gave me.
When Jesus' followers saw that what was going to happen, they said,
Lord, should we strike with our swords?
Then Simon Peter who had a sword, drew it, and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter,
Peter, put your sword away, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way? Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? No more of this.
and Jesus touched the man's ear and healed him. Then they stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. In that hour, Jesus said to them,
Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. This is your hour when darkness reigns, but this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled.
Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. A young man, wearing nothing but a linen garment, was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. Although, according to the Talmud, the Sanhedrin was forbidden from convening between the time of the evening and the morning sacrifice, the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials bound Jesus and brought him first to Annas, the former high priest, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the current high priest. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. Annas questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching.
I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said.
When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face.
Is this the way you answer the high priest?
If I said something wrong, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?
Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. It was there the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. Although the Jewish Mishnah states that a capital offense should be tried during the day and suspended at night, the Sanhedrin still assembled. Simon Peter and Judas were following Jesus. Because Judas was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. Judas, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. Peter entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. It was cold, and when some of them there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. There he warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any. Though many false witnesses came forward, their statements did not agree. Finally, 2 came forward and declared,
This fella said, I am able to destroy the temple of God made with human hands and rebuild it in 3 days, not made with hands.
Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus,
Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?
But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. The high priest said to him,
I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God.
If I tell you, you will not believe me. And if I asked you, you would not answer. I am, and you have said so, but I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven.
Then Caiaphas tore his clothes and said,
He has spoken blasphemy. We have heard it from his own lips. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?
He is worthy of death.
Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. They blindfolded him and then demanded,
Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?
And the guards took him and beat him, and they said many other insulting things to him. Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl of the high priest came to him. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him.
You also were with Jesus of Galilee.
But he denied it before them all.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Then he went out to the gateway, where another one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him.
Didn't I see you with him in the garden? This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth.
He denied it again with an oath.
I swear I don't know the man.
About an hour later, those standing there near the fire went up to Peter and said,
Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away, for you are a Galilean.
Then Peter began to call down curses, and he swore to them.
Curses on all of you. I swear again, I don't know the man.
Immediately, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken.
Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times.
And Peter went outside and wept bitterly. Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people made their plans how to have Jesus executed. Judas may have thought that he could force Jesus to establish his kingdom here on earth. He also hoped that all the crowds that had attended Jesus at his entry into Jerusalem would rise up against the rulers. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders.
I have sinned, for I have betrayed innocent blood.
What is that to us? That's your responsibility.
So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. The chief priest picked up the coins and said,
It is against the law to put this into the treasury, since it is blood money.
So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it has been called the field of blood to this very day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled.
They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me.
Even though the Mishnah stated that they could not judge on the eve of the Sabbath, nor on any festival, the Sanhedrin still bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate the governor. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked,
"What charges are you bringing against this man?"
If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you.
"Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law."
But we have no right to execute anyone.
This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace and summoned Jesus and asked him,
"Are you the king of the Jews?"
Is that your own idea? Or did others talk to you about me?
"Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?"
My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place.
"You are a king, then?"
You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me.
"What is truth?"
And they began to accuse him, saying,
We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be a Messiah, a king.
Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and to the crowd,
"I find no basis for a charge against this man."
But the Sanhedrin officials insisted.
Jesus stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here.
On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers, mercenaries, ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they had been enemies. When Jesus was accused of many things by the chief priests and the elders, Jesus gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him,
"Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?"
But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge. To the great amazement of the governor, Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them,
"You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him, neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him."
Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas, who was in prison with the insurrectionist who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them,
"Which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah and King of the Jews?"
For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. But the whole crowd shouted,
Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us!
Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting,
Crucify him! Crucify him!
For the third time he said to them,
"Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him punished and then release him.
But with loud shouts they insistently demanded that he be crucified. But Pilate answered,
You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against this man.
The Jewish leaders insisted.
We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God.
When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace.
Where do you come from?
Jesus gave him no answer.
Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?
You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin.
From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting,
If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar.
When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover.
Here is your king.
Take him away! Take him away! Crucify him!
Shall I crucify your king?
We have no king but Caesar.
While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message.
Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him.
When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd.
I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility.
His blood is on us and
on our children.
Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate decided to grant their demand. Pilate released Barabbas, who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked for. Pilate had Jesus flogged. Flogging was done by a pair of soldiers called lictors, using a short whip with several single or braided leather thongs. The thongs had small iron balls or sharp pieces of sheep bones tied at intervals. Jesus was stripped of his clothing, and his hands were tied to an upright post. His back, buttocks, and legs were flogged alternately by the two lictors. The lictors intended to weaken Jesus to a state just short of collapse. As the Roman soldiers repeatedly struck Jesus' back with full force, the iron balls caused deep contusions, and the leather thongs and sheep bones would cut into his skin. Then as the flogging continued, the lacerations tore into Jesus' underlying skeletal muscles and produced quivering ribbons of bleeding flesh. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a purple robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him.
Hail, King of the Jews!
They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe, put his own clothes on him, then they led him away to crucify him. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. As they were going out, a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country. They seized him and forced him to carry Jesus' patibulum, which is a 6-foot long, 6-inch by 6-inch beam, which would become the horizontal member of his cross. They put the patibulum on Simon, and he had to carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them,
Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, Blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. They will say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?
They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall. But after tasting it, he refused to drink it. It was 9 a.m. when they began the process of crucifying him. The soldiers nailed Jesus by his hands through his wrists. They used 8-inch long crude iron spikes to nail Jesus to the patibulum. Then they hauled it and Jesus up, roughly dragging him up and against the stipes. The stipes is the 11-foot vertical part of the cross, which was already anchored in the ground. Once Jesus was raised into the position where the patibulum locked into the stipes, they climbed a stool and pushed Jesus' feet up on the stipes. They nailed Jesus' feet in place with his legs slightly flexed, using another crude iron spike. The soldiers then took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom.
Let's not tear it. Let's decide by casting dice who will get it.
This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said,
They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment.
So this is what the soldiers did. And sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the top of the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate. They protested especially because the capital letters of Jesus, King of the Jews, were Yahweh, which also represents God. So in a way, Pilate was declaring that Jesus was God.
Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews.
What I have written, I have written.
The 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying,
You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God.
In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him.
He saved others, but he can't save himself. He's the Messiah, King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will see and believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now, if he wants him. For he said, I am the Son of God.
Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing.
The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said,
"If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself."
One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him.
"Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us."
But the other criminal rebuked him.
"Don't you fear God, since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom."
Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise.
Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple John, who he loved, standing nearby, he said to her,
Woman, here is your son. John, here is your mother.
From that time on, this disciple took her into his own home. From noon until 3 p.m, darkness came over all the land, for the sun stopped shining. About 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice,
Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani,
which means in Aramaic, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing there heard this, they said,
He's calling Elijah.
A jar of wine vinegar was there. One of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and was going to offer it to Jesus to drink. The rest said,
No, leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him.
Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that Scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said,
I am thirsty.
So they again soaked the sponge in wine vinegar, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said,
It is finished.
Jesus called out with a loud voice,
Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.
With that, he bowed his head, gave up his spirit, and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. Many women were there, watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him from Jerusalem were also there. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. Now it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. Because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. Breaking the legs of the victims would not allow them to raise themselves up to breathe. This would cause a faster death from asphyxiation. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead. They did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe. These things happened so that the Scripture would be fulfilled.
Not one of his bones will be broken. They will look on the one they have pierced.
When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed,
Surely this was a righteous man, and he was the Son of God.